He's a World Cup champion, and 4 days ago, cameras caught him doing something he still hasn't explained. Minutes before the biggest match of his life, he breaks away from his own teammates, walks the entire width of the pitch, alone, while thousands of fans in the stadium have no idea what he's doing. He crouches down at the sideline, digs into the grass with his bare hands, buries something, stands up, walks back into formation like nothing happened. Like the biggest match of his career hasn't even started yet, and he's already got something more important to take care of. Nobody in the stadium reacted. No commentator mentioned it. For a moment, it was like the cameras had caught something they weren't supposed to see. Then, a few hours later, drenched in champagne with a gold medal around his neck, that same man tells a reporter he's about to get his own head coach's face tattooed onto his body, permanently. Somewhere people will actually see it. And before any of that, before a ball was even kicked in the final, this same player looked into a camera and said that if his team won the World Cup, he was calling his coach the very next day to quit the national team. For good. At 27 years old, in the prime of his career. A secret buried in the dirt. A promise made in front of millions. And a retirement threat that, 4 days later, still hasn't been answered. 3 moments. 1 man. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly why they're all connected. And it has almost nothing to do with football. The player I'm talking about is Marc Cucurella, Spain's left back. If you watch the 2026 World Cup, you already know the hair, the relentless overlapping runs, the way he never stops working a flank for 120 minutes. What you might not know is what's actually driving him. Let's start with the facts, because this story only works if you understand what he just won. On July 19, 2026, Spain beat Argentina 1-0 in the World Cup final at MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. It was a brutal, cagey match. Spain dominated possession and shots but couldn't break through in regulation. Argentina played the entire extra time a man down after Enzo Fernandez picked up a second yellow card in stoppage time. Then, in the second period of extra time, substitute Ferran Torres pounced on a loose ball in the box and buried it in the 106th minute. That was the only goal of the game. Spain's second World Cup title. Their manager, Luis de la Fuente, became the oldest coach in history to win one, at 65. Cucurella played every single minute of the tournament for Spain. Now let's go back to that first moment. The coin. Before kickoff, while both teams were going through the pre-match ceremony, Cucurella slipped away from the formation, crossed almost the entire width of the pitch to reach the left touchline, pulled a coin out of his sock, crouched down, and buried it in the grass. Nobody watching live had any idea what they'd just seen. The explanation came from a former Spanish left-back named Joan Capdevila. 16 years earlier, before the 2010 World Cup final against the Netherlands in Johannesburg, Capdevila, who played the exact same position Cucurella plays now, buried a coin of his own before kickoff. Spain won that final, their first World Cup ever. So this time around, with the final approaching, Capdevila reached out to Cucurella and asked him to do the same thing, in the same spot, for the same reason. After Spain won, Capdevila posted the story himself, telling his followers he'd done it in 2010, that he'd asked Cucurella to repeat it, and calling him a world champion. 2 coins, 16 years apart. Both times, Spain lifted the trophy. Is that a coincidence? Almost certainly. Football doesn't run on buried coins, but when a ritual actually works twice, in the exact same position, on a World Cup final pitch, you can understand why an entire fan base is going to keep telling this story for years. If the coin was a secret, the second thing Cucurella did was the opposite. A promise made in broad daylight that he can't take back. Before the tournament even started, Cucurella told the press that if Spain won it all, he'd get a tattoo of Luis de la Fuente's face. Not hidden somewhere private, visibly, on show. At the time, it read like a throwaway line. Then Spain won, and within minutes, medal still around his neck, Cucurella was posting on social media, asking if there were any tattoo artists in the room. That was 4 days ago. As of today, he still hasn't picked a spot. He said it has to be visible enough that people will actually see it and ask him about it, but he admitted in the mixed zone afterward that he genuinely hasn't decided where. De La Fuente, for his part, isn't letting him off easy. He's publicly said his players are men of their word, so it's happening, and joked that at least he's not that ugly to look at. So right now, somewhere in Spain, there's a World Cup winner walking around with an unfinished promise on his to-do list. A buried coin nobody was supposed to notice. A tattoo everybody is now demanding he get. Two completely different stories. But both tell you the same thing about this guy. He's not just going through the motions out there. And speaking of not going through the motions, Cucurella wasn't just fighting a battle with a coin and a coach. He had one with the greatest player of his generation too. During the final, tensions between Cucurella and Argentina spilled over more than once, to the point that even outside observers picked a side. Broadcaster Piers Morgan publicly accused Lionel Messi of trying to manufacture a red card against Cucurella during the match, essentially calling out Messi for playing referee management games against Spain's left-back in the biggest game of the year. Whatever actually happened out there, it tells you something. Even Messi's side of the pitch had to deal with Cucurella, calm, physical, and clearly getting under people's skin in a good way for Spain. But I want to pause the fun stuff here, because I think what's coming next is the real reason you should remember this man's name. Remember that third thing I mentioned at the start? Cucurella saying he might walk away from the national team entirely if Spain won this World Cup. At 27, coming off a Euro 2024 title and now a World Cup. In the prime of his career, at a club as big as Real Madrid, after he was signed away from Chelsea for a fee north of 60 million euros. On paper, that statement makes zero sense for an athlete at the top of his sport, unless you know what's actually happening at home. Marc Cucurella and his partner, Claudia Rodriguez, have 3 children, their sons Mateo and Rio, and their daughter Bella. Mateo, their oldest, was diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. He is nonverbal. Cucurella and Claudia have spoken about this publicly themselves, most notably in the Amazon Prime documentary series, Married to the Game, where both of them broke down describing what those early years were like. The signs showed up gradually. Claudia has described noticing that Mateo behaved differently from other babies his age, not making eye contact the way you'd expect, not responding to his name. For a long time there were no clear answers, just appointments and uncertainty. Claudia has talked about the two of them dropping Mateo off at school every day while she was pregnant with their second child, and driving home in tears because they weren't getting the support they needed and didn't know where to turn. Once the diagnosis came, Cucurella has said the hardest part wasn't the label itself, it was not knowing how to help. He's talked about learning that the goal was never to change his son, but to understand him. He read, he consulted specialists, and, according to his own account, he leaned on people who actually live with autism themselves to understand how Mateo experiences the world. A move to London eventually connected the family with a school and therapy program that made a real difference, and Cucurella has said those sessions are now just part of Mateo's everyday routine, something his son genuinely enjoys. And that's the part that reframes everything else in this video. Cucurella has said outright that school access and therapy support for Mateo now factor into every career decision he makes. Not the biggest contract, not the biggest club, whichever city can actually take care of his son. So when a player who just won the World Cup and the Euros back-to-back tells you he might walk away from the national team at 27, that's not a man running out of ambition, that's a father whose priorities were rearranged a long time ago, and football just hasn't caught up to that yet. And here's the thing, as of today, 4 days after that final whistle, Cucurella still hasn't confirmed whether he's made that call to De La Fuente. The retirement question is sitting exactly where he left it before the biggest game of his life, unresolved. Suddenly the coin buried in secret and the tattoo promised out loud look like two sides of the same coin, no pun intended. One is Cucurella quietly asking for a little luck on behalf of a team, a coach, and a country. The other is him keeping a public promise because his word matters to him. And underneath both of those is a man who has spent years learning to keep an entirely different kind of promise. To a son who communicates in his own way, on his own terms, and who has nothing to do with trophies or tattoos or coins buried in a stadium in New Jersey. People will remember Marc Cucurella for the assist runs, for outlasting Messi's Argentina for 120 minutes, for the coin that might have carried a little magic from 2010. But if you ask the people who actually know him, it's very possible none of that is what defines him. It might just be a father who, after the biggest win of his career, still has a 4-year-old waiting at home who needs him to be understood, not celebrated. So, here's what I want to know from you. Do you think Capdevila's coin ritual was pure coincidence, or is there something to a superstition that's now worked twice in 2 different World Cup finals? Do you think Cucurella actually goes through with retiring from Spain? Or was that just final week adrenaline talking? And where do you think De La Fuente's face ends up? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story hit you the way it hit me, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.